Always choose to talk.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to be?
The time for change has come. That was the message from Malaysia's new leader Mahathir Mohamad after his shock victory over the ruling coalition in May. Mahathir, who turns 93 next week, is the world's oldest head of state. He opposed the political forces he was once a part of, the United Malay National Organization, or UMNO, which had ruled Malaysia since its independence from Britain in 1957. Malaysia is a diverse nation with millions of Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists and Christians living side by side. A contrasting place where the old and new come together. But many Malaysians have been angry in recent years over high-level government corruption and a rising cost of living. Prime Minister Mahathir has accused his predecessor Najib Razak of stealing hundreds of millions of dollars and embezzling public funds. This week, Talk to Al Jazeera travels to the Malaysian capital to sit down with the man fighting against corruption and for a more united Malaysia. Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad talks to Al Jazeera. Prime Minister, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
You're welcome.
You stepped aside as Prime Minister in 2003 after serving for more than 2 decades in the top job here in Malaysia, but you never really left politics. You were still very much a dominant figure within the ruling United Malays National Organization, or UMNO as it's known locally, and it's essentially been the monopoly holder of government since Malaysia gained independence. In 2016, though, you resigned from UMNO and you set up your own party, announcing that you would contest the next elections, which you eventually ended up winning, surprisingly. What is it that made you decide to run again for office at the age of 92?
Well, when I stepped down in 2003, I had no intention of being in politics still. But after I stepped down and the new leader takes over, a lot of people came to see me, asking me to do something because they were not satisfied with the leadership of my successors. Responding to the appeal, I tried to advise, but even with the 5th Prime Minister, I had to resign from the party and campaign to have him step down and give way to the Datuk Sri Najib. Eventually, Datuk Sri Najib took over, but again, people were not happy because of a lot of scandals and involving him, a lot of money was lost. So again, people came to see me, asking me, please do something.
Well, the big news that's interested people internationally about Malaysia has unfortunately been the issue of corruption, the case of the Malaysian Investment Fund, the 1MDB, and the hundreds of millions of dollars that have gone missing. The chief culprit in this, or the most prominent culprit in this, is the former Prime Minister Najib Razak. Now, he appeared in court on Wednesday and is now being charged. What evidence is there that he stole money? I mean, why should people believe that he's guilty and it's not just an attempt by you or your allies to get rid of your political opponents?
Well, I am sure that the prosecutors, the Attorney General has got enough evidence to decide to go to the courts. I am not involved in investigation, but I know generally that one of the reasons why the people didn't want Najib to go on and he was defeated in the last election because of the scandals involving huge sums of money which he was involved in. And of course, the law must take its course, and if the AG finds there is sufficient evidence of acts which were criminal, then the AG takes the decision.
So there's a complete separation here between your role in terms of politics and the judiciary and the way in which the legal process is taking place.
Well, when I came back, one of our promises was that we will honor the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and the judiciary. Mm-hmm. So I cannot interfere with what the AG wants to do.
Former Prime Minister Najib claimed that the money that was in his accounts, we're talking about $681 million was a gift from Saudi Arabia to help in his election campaign. Now, either he's telling the truth and Saudi Arabia has effectively been interfering in Malaysian politics by funding somebody's campaign, or he's lying and the money was stolen, but he's using Saudi Arabia to try and cover his tracks, which would also mean that Saudi Arabia is interfering in Malaysian politics or domestic affairs.
Yeah, when large sums of money move, there will be records in the bank, checks being issued, instructions being made. When Najib claims that it was given to him as a gift, that huge sum of money, is not only his statement that is to be taken as the truth. He must provide documentary evidence, like letters from the bank, and also we want to know this very generous man, where does he get the money to give so much money to?
But my point here is that aside from the corruption, there is a more dangerous issue, which is foreign interference in Malaysian politics. If we are to say that the money did come from a Saudi royal who gave it to him for his election campaign, then Saudi Arabia is funding your political parties, which is something that I'm not sure Malaysians would be happy about, a foreign country dictating who becomes prime minister. And if he's not telling the truth, then also Saudi Arabia is interfering because they're allowing him to use their name to cover up the tracks of embezzlement.
Yeah, we are disappointed in that Saudi Arabia has not denied that the money was given by Saudi. At one time he claims one particular person, and then he claims that it is Saudi royalty and all that. But he has shown no proof of this. So we can't accuse Saudi Arabia unless, of course, there is proof that Saudi Arabia has, in fact, tried to interfere in Malaysian politics.
This isn't the first major corruption case to plague a government in Malaysia. In fact, when you were prime minister the first time round, there were accusations at the time of widespread corruption among some officials. But your critics would say that instead of you properly investigating it, you decided to sack the man who claimed to be fighting it, who was at the time your right-hand man, Deputy Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, and throw him behind bars. Do you still stand by what you did back then?
Well, the accusation was made because police reported to me that about his involvement in something that is regarded as criminal in this country. Beyond that, it is the police which has to work. I cannot do anything to put people into jail. There was a trial lasting 9 months.
It was a trial that many human rights organizations, international, it was criticized.
Always human rights people, when they have their favorites being put before the court, they will say that the court is being manipulated. That is their right. They can make any accusation, but in the law, according to the laws of this country, it is the court which must decide.
But if you could go back in time, would you have maybe investigated it a bit further or done something different, or because you now have a relationship which appears to be mended?
That was before. On the basis of police report. They only told me because he is a very prominent member of the government. Beyond that, it is the police and the judiciary which takes action, not me. So I'm not to be blamed for that.
But you were head of state. I mean, you introduced the Internal Security Act.
I didn't. That was inherited from the British, and that was used by all the prime ministers of Malaysia before me, the first, the second, the third, and I also used.
But there was amendments made to it that made it more difficult for public protests, for example.
There was during my time. They introduced the writ of habeas corpus, in which several people were released on the basis that there was not sufficient evidence for us to detain the person during my time. Before that, there was no writ of habeas corpus. This can be checked with the records.
Your predecessor, Prime Minister Najib Razak, he called you Malaysia's #1 actor after your alliance with Anwar Ibrahim and the rapprochement that you made with him. Now, Is that rapprochement and that re-emergence of a coalition or friendship or partnership, whatever it may be called, is this a genuine attempt to rectify mistakes and maybe unify Malaysia once again? Or is it, as Prime Minister Najib or former Prime Minister Najib claims, an act to reinvent yourself and maybe lead you back to power?
Well, Anwar was head of one of the major parties in the opposition. And if we are going to overthrow Najib, all the parties in the opposition must form a coalition. Going on their own by themselves, they will never be able to defeat him. So it was decided that we form a coalition, and whatever may have happened in the past, that is not as important as the attempt to overthrow Najib, because what Najib has done is terrible for the country. So Anwar and myself and many others who in the past accused me of all kinds of wrongdoings, we decided that the past is the past. Now we have to come together, because the overthrowing of Najib is far more important than our previous quarrels.
What was it that was so bad that Najib did, as far as you're concerned? What were the main threats to Malaysia?
Number one, of course, he was involved in a lot of scandals, including accusation of his stealing money from the government, not small amount, billions of ringgit. And also there was this evidence brought up by the American Department of Justice. We cannot ignore all these things and say, well, this did not happen. The whole world believes that it happened. So we must make sure that if there is any basis for their accusation, then it must go to a court of law. When he was Prime Minister, he manipulated the Attorney General.
He was sacked. He was fired, I believe. The lead investigator. He fired the lead investigator.
Yeah, he fired him just before he was supposed to prefer a charge in a court of law against Najib. He was fired, and a new man appointed who cleared Najib of any wrongdoing. But nobody believes that he was free of wrongdoing. Now that he is not the Prime Minister and he cannot manipulate the justice, the judiciary and the other departments, the law must take its course.
But how is it that he was allowed to manipulate the system? How did the system allow for the Prime Minister to interfere to the point where he was able to fire the lead investigator, and now you are Prime Minister, that same system is there? So then they can say, well, you could do the same thing. What checks and balances are there now to prevent this?
I could do the same thing, but I didn't do. You see, I was 22 years as Prime Minister. There was no accusation of stealing money against me. And all the other accusations were just political accusations with no proof as to what they say being true. But in the case of Najib today, we have enough evidence, and the rule of law must be applied.
Okay, let's go back to your relationship with Anwar. And you promised as part of your campaign that you would secure a pardon for him if elected, and you've done that. But you've also promised to hand him the reins within 2 years. Why 2 years? And also, what guarantees are there that you won't change your mind? For example, you suddenly think maybe that you're better at the job, you have more experience, and you decide to continue.
We need to form a coalition in order to defeat Najib. And the coalition must include Anwar's party. And the condition for Anwar to join the coalition is that he will be the next Prime Minister after me. So I am.
But the next could be after 10 years or it could be after 2. Why did you pick 2 years? Publicly you said 2 years.
Because I'm old. I'm 93 years old.
You don't seem, you look,
well,
you say 92 years young.
But 2 years more, I'll be 95 years old.
Yeah.
You don't meet many 95-year-old Prime Ministers who is elected.
So it's just an arbitrary, it's not because of the Vision 2020 that you had once announced when you were Prime Minister first.
Yeah, but I will try to work towards Vision 2020. But after I step down, it's left to Anwar whether he wants to continue with it or not.
One of the criticisms that you faced when you were Prime Minister the first time around was that you curbed freedoms, as I mentioned, in terms of in terms of what happened with regards to Internal Security Act, or that some of the opponents were jailed, like Anwar and so forth. Are you looking to use the same strongman approach this time, or is your approach maybe more of a unifying, healing phase that Malaysia needs to go through, particularly when we consider, and we'll talk about the economy in a second, that we can say the Malaysian economy has maybe stuttered, to say the least, in the past few years compared to the heights that you had brought it when you were Prime Minister?
Well, I have to go according to the manifesto set up by the coalition. I'm not as free to do anything I like, because I am bound to carry on what the coalition has decided. And the coalition has decided that we will go back to democracy, we will go back to the rule of law. So today I cannot on my own just arrest anybody. And during my time, I didn't make use of my power to arrest people at random. There must be a cause for it.
Further afield, let's go back to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. Malaysia announced it was withdrawing its soldiers from Saudi Arabia. These are the troops that were participating in the Saudi-led coalition that's been bombarding Yemen for almost 3 years now. Why did you take the decision to bring back those soldiers?
Our policy is to be friendly with all countries, not to participate in any war, except for peacekeeping. Our troops are there ostensibly for training, but Saudi is at war with Yemen. We don't want to be involved in other people's war.
Are you not worried, though, about the Saudi reaction? And the reason why I ask is because Saudi Arabia, according to neutral observers, is being led in, let's say, a non-traditional way. There have been several reports that the Saudis, who control Islam's holiest sites, namely Mecca and the Kaaba, have used Hajj, the Muslim pilgrimage, and visa allocation as leverage to blackmail Muslim majority countries into doing what they want. And obviously here it's a big thing. Are you not worried that the Saudis would use that against you, or have they tried to? Has there been any reaction from Riyadh with regards to your decision?
So far there has been no reaction in terms of reducing the number of pilgrims going to Mecca. But of course, Saudi is an independent country. It has its rights. If it decides to take any action, that is the right of the...
But when you informed them that you were withdrawing the troops, what was the reaction from there?
Nothing. Only the press was asking. The government didn't say anything.
What about your relationship with the United Arab Emirates? Because central to the corruption scandal that's engulfed Malaysia and the one in MDB case is a man named Zhao Lao. Now, according to statements made by former Prime Minister Najib, Zhao was an asset because, and here's a quote, he said he had such strong links with the Emirati Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed. How do you see Malaysia's relationship with the United Arab Emirates, especially if a lot of this money, and we know, according to a lot of independent reports, that Dubai has been a hub for money laundering and so forth?
We want to be friendly with all the countries in the world. We don't want to be involved in their conflicts. There may be scandals or whatever, but that's not going to affect our relationship country to country. But
what if that country is involved in funneling money that is public resources, essentially helping somebody steal your money?
We have to find evidence of that.
And if you do find evidence, what would your reaction?
Well, if we find the evidence, we'll send a note saying that this is not the proper things to do and all that. I mean, we don't go to war.
Nobody was thinking about war, but I mean in terms of
but normal procedures in diplomatic relation is that you send notes of protest and things like that. Maybe we'll do that.
Coming back to the issue of Najib and the corruption case against him, could you foresee that he would be sentenced if the evidence indeed is presented? Can you foresee that somebody like him will be put behind bars, and what kind of message would you try and send to those who have indeed, if proven, been trying to steal or use their positions of influence to steal public funds? Because what I want to ask here is that the issue of corruption, or the accusation of corruption, have plagued Malaysia for many years, and it seems that nobody has really been punished by it. So essentially, the political, while it's a legal issue, but the political side have given a green light for anybody to do whatever they want because nobody's really been punished.
Well, if there is evidence of any criminal act, the rule of law will apply. That Najib is being charged, despite his being a former prime minister, has nothing to do with the application of the rule of law. Whoever it is, of whatever rank, if he breaks the law will operate against.
He was one of your proteges. You essentially helped build him. You don't share the blame here for it?
No, being protege doesn't mean that he's exempted from the law.
Not that, I mean in the sense that you helped him reach to that position.
Well, I didn't know he was going to commit crimes as he was accused of later on. At the time when I was supporting him, he appeared to be a good candidate to become prime minister.
Let's talk about the economy, and you are credited with transforming Malaysia's economy, making it one of Asia's tiger economies, as they were called. Things have slowed down in the past few years because of the corruption, but also other issues. What are your plans to re-inject some sort of energy and revive Malaysia's economy?
We have a lot of plans for resuscitating Malaysia's economy. But first of all, we have to get rid of this debt that we carry, huge debt amounting to more than 1 trillion Malaysian ringgit. We have to reduce this debt so that the country is not saddled with having to pay interest and principal on these debts, which will prevent us from having the money for development of the country.
Finally, I want to ask you, you are, as we mentioned, the eldest head of state in the world. You have witnessed many world events. What are the highlights of your career that you look back on, and maybe your proudest moments? And if there is also one thing maybe you regret most, what is it?
Well, when a leader applies his skills or knowledge to the development of the country, it's not always that everybody appreciates. I know there are people who ran down all the things that I have done, and there are people who appreciated what I have done. To me, it is irrelevant. I did what I was able to do, and I was satisfied that I have given my best for my country. That's all. And now I am again in a position to take corrective action. And if I don't, I think it will be very selfish indeed. If I am still able, I will contribute whatever I can towards resuscitating this country, which has the potential to become a developed country, provided the policies of the governments are correct.
But what is your proudest moment? What is the highlights of your career? You have 93 years to choose from.
Well, this is a multiracial country. It's not only multiracial, it's multi-religious, multilingual, multicultural. And even in terms of the economy, some communities are very rich, others are poor. When I became Prime Minister in 1981, the fear was that I would be against the Chinese as a community. But in the end, when I stepped down, the Chinese were the people who supported me best, and I retained my two-thirds majority because of their support. To me, that is very satisfactory, because it means that the accusation that I was against the Chinese is not true, because in the end, they were the ones who supported me. So for that, I think I can be very satisfied.
Prime Minister, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
You're welcome.